Welcome to the sixth presentation in a series of 7 that celebrates Parsons' 150th birthday. Today, Dave Maddox and I will be talking to you about business concerns in Parsons in the last 150 years. We're sticking to our normal routine, and Dave will be giving you an overview of what has been happening in the United States during the time period that we're covering, as well as some information about what has happened in Parsons during that same time period.
Well, as always, I'll give you the overview of where we're at on the chapter. This is chapter 6 in the book, and I'll give you the overview here in just a second. But we will, in our presentation here, we will also cover other time frames. This is just kind of in keeping with the chapters in the book. So in the book, we are in the 1980s, 1990s, and in the United States at that time, 1980, John Lennon was assassinated. 1983, the internet was born. 1984, Ronald Reagan re-elected president. 1986, the space shuttle exploded with no survivors. 1988, George Herbert Walker Bush elected president. 1991, the very short Gulf War. 1992, Bill Clinton was elected president. 1995, the Oklahoma City bombing happened with 168 people killed. 1996, Bill Clinton was reelected, and in 1999, the euro currency was first introduced. So that's a bit about what's happening in the United States, and then now, as usual, I'll give you kind of some things that happened in Parsons in the 80s and 90s. 1981, the band shell behind the middle school was disassembled and razed. It had been built as a PWA project in the 30s. 1985, the original downtown concrete canopies were replaced with new ones at a cost of over $375,000. 1989, the decision was made to restore and reopen the municipal auditorium. 1992, the Iron Horse Historical Museum was dedicated. 1993, the restoration of the Carnegie Arts Center from the old Carnegie Library. 1994, Parsons dedicated their new police station. 1996, streets around the Parsons Plaza changed from one-way to two-way. And 1999, the bond issue passed to renovate the middle school. So that just gives you a bit about what was going on in the 80s and 90s. And now we're ready to start the presentation. The first thing we're going to talk about is the Parsons Board of Trade, what's now the Parsons Chamber of Commerce. Started out as a Board of Trade. It was incorporated in 1886, and they sold shares of stock at $10 each. And one of their first accomplishments was this brochure that was done in 1887 that basically they had the woodcuts of all the different what they would call the better buildings in Parsons, as you can see. And they were already referring to Parsons as the wonder of the great Southwest and the metropolis of Southeast Kansas. So already doing some promoting there. And some of the engravings, the pictures there that you can see are of the old Abbott House, the First National Bank, the Kimball Block, the Edwards Opera House, the Matheson House, and National Mills. And this brochure was printed by Rand McNally. And J.R. Brown, who was the owner of the National Mills, was president of the Board of Trade at the time. And the basic purpose of the board was to promote and encourage business in Parsons. Next slide. So then the next thing, the Board of Trade did not last very long. By 1893, the Parsons Commercial Club had been organized as a follow-up to the Board of Trade. Board of Directors elected C.H. Kimball, Charles Kimball, as president and J.F. Steele as vice president. And E.B. Stevens, who was the mayor at the time, gave the club 6 months free rent in his building. And this time there was a membership fee. They didn't sell stock, but there was a membership fee of $2. So you had to pay $2 to be in it. And then you had dues of 25 cents a week. So it wasn't real expensive to be in the commercial club. Again, by 1902, they were still calling it the commercial club, but they had reorganized, and they cited past problems as the reason they had to reorganize, of disagreements, grievances, and lack of compromise, which probably is the main reason things don't work in most things. But I thought that was interesting that they came right out and said it. By 1913, the Chamber of Commerce had been organized, and the first year they had a membership of 87 businesses. And the purpose there, they had kind of refined their purpose, and I thought it was more fitting. And the purpose was to not for advancing any one person's business, but the business of the entire city. So I think that was that's more of a better slogan than that they had before. And through the years, they had their meeting places in several different places, namely the Matheson Hotel was an early day place where they met. They did meet in the municipal building and had an office there. And then later on, after the Parsonian was built, their office was located in the Parsonian. So that gives you just a bit about the Chamber of Commerce. Next slide. Okay, now we're going to talk just some about some different businesses in Parsons. This is an 1895 photo of Skelton's Foundry. E.L. Skelton completed the brick building on the corner of Grand and 21st Street. The business was started in 1883. They did castings, machine work, as well as they manufactured columns, iron fencing, cresting. They made sash weights, anything that could be cast. That's pretty much what they did. The building was specifically designed to be a foundry, a machine shop. So, next slide. This is a 1907 photograph of the same building. And this business had several owners throughout the years. If you want to go on to the next one. And this is the building today. So this is the same building, and it's been there since 1883. So it's an old building, probably one of the older business buildings in Parsons. And it looks pretty much exactly like it looked, other than it's white now, back then. This building was purchased by Melvin Alexander in 1940, and they produced electric winches and special machines for industry. They also produced custom design machines for manufacturers. And the business was started by Melvin Alexander in 1927, and then bought this building in 1940. It was later run by his son Dale, and is now run by Dale's two sons, Mike and Don. The building now, I believe, is mostly used for storage. They have another building at one of the industrial parks. The next business we're going to talk about is the Parsons Bottling Works. It was established in 1881. T.K. McFarland purchased the bottling works in 1895. It was located at 1920 Washington. By 1898, L.C. Moses had moved to Parsons from Texas and purchased the bottling works from McFarland. In 1909, they had the following products that they were bottling: Coca-Cola, root beer, ginger ale. They also did Pepsi-Cola, Jersey cream, and spring water. So, and in 1902 advertisement said, "We will deliver 24 bottles of soda, assorted flavors, anywhere in the city for 75 cents. So you could have got yourself some pop delivered back then for 75 cents. So next one. And then this is just an advertisement. by 1914, L.C. Moses had sold to another guy. It seemed like most of the bottlers didn't last too long. I don't know, they wore themselves out or whatever, so went through a lot of owners, but C.O. Humphrey had purchased the place, and this 1915 ad from the Parsons Sun states, "Nothing for children in the summertime is better than sweet, delicately flavored, effervescent drinks like Purity sodas." And they really played up the fact that the Purity deal, and mostly that was because at the time there was somewhat dangerous when they were reusing bottles that you could get sick if the bottles weren't cleaned properly. And they had a different ad that said, "Disease and death may lurk in bottles," which I thought was quite a contrast to the first ad that we heard about how it was sweet and delicately flavored, and then you have another ad that says "Disease and death may lurk in bottles." But basically, he was talking about he had a sterilization process used to ensure the customer safety as far as cleaning the bottles. So.
Okay, the next business we will discuss is the Parsons Poultry and Eggplant. The photograph you see here is of not the best picture of the Parsons Poultry and Eggplant, but we'll start with this one. It was originally located at 2101 Washington, and it was established in Parsons in 1908. In 1932, the company enlarged its building and installed a modern egg-breaking plant that employed 100 people. During egg season, and Dave and I talked about this, we both didn't know that there was an egg season. We thought chickens laid eggs all year round, but apparently the egg season is March, April, and May for a business like this. The company would break 75 train cars full of eggs, freezing and storing them. So it was a big production. The company shipped millions of pounds of dressed poultry a year, and 35 people worked in that part of the company. In 1946, and that's when this fire occurred, the biggest fire in town since 1930, destroyed the plant, and poor water pressure was blamed by the fire department for the total destruction of the plant. In 1950, Woods Lumber built a lumber yard on the site today, and on the site today it's T.H. Rogers.
And apparently, according to Jana, it's not the same site. It's across the street that T.H. Rogers is now. So apparently they moved across the street because we got corrected at the...
That's right. And Jana would know because she worked there.
Right. We'll take her word for it.
Okay. Next one is of Swift and Company. In 1902, a Swift representative was in Parsons looking for a location to establish a branch of the company. And they started out in a one-story small building, but later in 1907, they built a two-story brick building at 20th and Washington. And according to accounts in the paper, and I think this is really strange, but I've heard of stranger things, but I still think it's strange. The second floor of the building held the offices, and the first floor of the building is where they kept the chickens. And at any given point, there were up to 10,000 chickens on the first floor of this building. And the offices and storage was on the second floor.
That smelled really good in the offices, probably.
I guess. Well, it's better than trying to get those chickens up the stairs. Anyway, they produced eggs, dressed chickens, and butter. And in 1946, a new building was erected at 20th and Crawford for cheese production. Local dairy farmers provided the milk for the cheese and the butter, and Swift sold baby chickens to local farmers, who then sold the eggs and the chickens back to Swift. So it was kind of a mutually beneficial cycle of trade there. Swift closed the cheese-making operation in 1967, and in 1973, the remaining poultry operations were transferred to Huntsville, Alabama.
I should have gone.
Okay, yeah, and before we go on, here's a an ad from the Parsons Sun talking about Swift and Company and them getting ready to have chicks for sale for the farmers who could raise them and sell them back to Swift. And Swift's also had...
This is what you were talking about earlier, where you buy something and then they raise it or whatever. And so this is the Swift's feeder of the week.
Right, which I think is pretty exciting that, now they have lawn of the week and business of the month and everything, but they had feeder of the week, so you might be able to brag to your neighbors that my farm was chosen as Swift's feeder of the week this week.
All right, the next thing we'll talk a little bit about is the Parsons Stockyards. They opened for business in June of 1932. They were owned by and leased by the Katy Railroad. The Chamber of Commerce and the Katy both encouraged the opening of the stockyards. There was some doubt as to whether it would be a success, and both the Chamber and the Katy were both instrumental in making sure that this happened. Pictured here is the Exchange Building, completed in the summer of 1935 at a cost of $25,000. And this building succeeded the old railroad coaches that were used as offices during the first 3 years of their existence. This building housed the offices of the commission companies, the livestock buyers. It had a barber shop, it had showers in the locker room, and it had a cafe. So in 1979, the sales pavilion moved to its present location on US Highway 59, and in 1982, a fire destroyed the building and the old stockyards. The next one we'll talk just a little bit about. This is my favorite of all of them. I had to put it in there even though it may or may not really fit, but it is a business, and he was a businessman. This is Dr. C.R. Ellis. He was a veterinary surgeon, and originally from San Antonio, Texas. He traveled for about 10 years lecturing on the anatomy and diseases of the horse from 1875 to 1885. He first came to Parsons as a traveling veterinarian and surgeon, and he located at Talbert's livery stable in 1885. By the 1890s, Dr. Ellis was a resident of Parsons, and he ran his business out of the Metropolitan Livery Stable. So basically, the veterinarians set up most of their business in a livery stable, because keeping horses healthy at the time was big business, because that was your main mode of transportation. By the mid-1890s, Dr. Talbot was back on the lecture tour and no longer a resident of Parsons. He went back to telling people about horses and diseases of the horse, though. Next one.
The next slide brings us to talk about different barber shops in Parsons. In the 1870s and the 1880s, the term barbershop wasn't really widely used. Tonsorial parlors was the name used for barbershops, and I have no idea why that's the case, and I hope there weren't any tonsillectomies at the barbershops. But by the turn of the century, people were calling them barbershops. But you could get a haircut, a shave, a shampoo, hot and cold baths, because those weren't necessarily available on an everyday basis like they are today. But in 1909, shops in Parsons became regulated and inspected by the State Board of Health. So they were making sure that cleanliness was a concern in the barbershops in town. And many of the barbershops were in hotels or in department stores. And you can see from this Union barbershop ad that many of them were close together. It looks like on Main Street, every 2 or 3 shops was a barbershop, and the same thing on the first 100 block of Central, both north and south.
I think we decided that because they probably didn't take appointments that they all located next to each other. So you just go, I'm going to go down there, and if one guy's busy, you'll go on to the next one until you find a place to get your hair cut.
Right. And then by 1915, there were 16 barbershops listed in the city directory. And through the 1940s, barbershops were still segregated, and they were listed as for black or for white. 10 of the shops of the 16 were union shops. The prices, the hours of businesses, all of that was set as a group. So it didn't really matter which one you went to out of those 10. The prices were the same. It was probably, like Dave said, availability, or maybe you liked the barber or you liked the other people who went there. But they were union shops. And can we go back to the slide right before this one? If you look on that slide very closely, I think there's a little sign up on the mirror that says we're a union shop.
Yeah, there is, yeah. Yeah.
So that was one of the 10 unions.
We don't know which one of these. I know this barbershop was in Parsons. I don't know which one, but we know it was one of the 10 that was a union shop because they have a union sign up there. So.
Yes, and notice too that they're all multiple chair shops. Yes. Okay, next slide.
Okay, we're going to talk just a bit about photographers in Parsons. Photographers were basically, there was a photographer here from the beginning. The earliest photographer that I know of that I've been able to verify is L.W. Ong, O-N-G. He was on Forest Avenue, and I know he was here. I have a photograph that he took from 1872. It was very early 1872, but I found a newspaper ad advertising his business in 1871, which is the year Parsons was founded. So basically, Mr. Ong was here, I think, photography-wise, as early as anybody. And what you see here on the screen are the backs of cabinet cards, which were the cardboard pieces that the photographs were glued to. So if you have an old photograph that's got a cardboard backing, it was probably a cabinet card. They were from the early 1900s. And some of the different photographers we've got listed here, G.W. Bolander, he was in business from the late 1880s till the early 1890s. Unfortunately, Mr. Bolander died of typhoid fever here in Parsons at the age of 31. Then another one there is listed is Fitch, the photographer, again from the mid-1880s to 1900. He was on Johnson Avenue, which is Main Street now. A.B. Sipple was here from the late 1870s all the way through the 1900s. He again was on Johnson Avenue. S.W. Kerr was here in the 1890s, and later he was in business with his brother. They were known as Kerr Brothers Photographers, also on Johnson Avenue. And then the one in the bottom right is Peterson Studio Grand, early 1900s, and they were on Broadway. Now we're going to talk just a bit about Ellis Martin, the furniture business that was here in Parsons, and the building that you're looking at here. Ellis Martin was founded in 1890. They had a small store at 1822 Broadway, which was just a little ways away from where this building is. In 1893, they built this 3-story brick building, and it was constructed to house the furniture and the undertaking at that time. If you had a furniture store, you were also the undertaker because you made things out of wood, and coffins were made out of wood. So most all the furniture stores in the early days were also undertakers. In 1925, they opened a new funeral home at 1826 Broadway, which is just to the right in this picture. And the furniture stayed at 1822-24 Broadway, which is the big building that you see. The furniture store was sold to Pete Davis in 1954, and at that time it was the second oldest Parsons retail business in number of years of continuous operation. The funeral home that was operated by Martin's at 1826 Broadway, just to the right of this building, was in business until 1957, and then it sold out to Shigley's. So if you want to go to the next slide.
Although I might say that that's one of my favorite buildings in town that's no longer here. I love the keyhole.
Yeah, it's
keyhole
neat.
windows
It
up
is
on
neat.
the third floor. Yes.
So then we're going to kind of talk about a different business, and then we're going to kind of mix them together. So you'll understand what I'm talking about here in a minute. So this is the original, well, not the original, but an early place of business for Sun Engraving. It actually got its start as a department of the Sun Publishing Company, which is the Parsons Sun, in 1939. The plant operations were housed in a 150 square foot area on the second floor of the Sun building when they were established. Jack Gribben was the manager. In 1946, it was organized as the Sun Engraving Company with Clyde Reed Jr. as president and Gribben as vice president. And in 1953, the firm moved to this location at 1820 Broadway. So it would be just to the east of the Ellis Martin building that we saw. This is a 5,000 square foot building here. So if you want to go to the next slide. Okay, in 1966, Sun Engraving purchased the old Ellis Martin building at 1822-24 Broadway from Pete Davis. And the plans were to use the bottom floor for production and the upper floor for storage. So if you can go back 2 slides. You look at this building. Now go forward 2 slides. You see basically the building on the right is the Ellis Martin building, but they took off the part Mike liked the best, which was the 3rd floor. They've taken the 3rd floor off, and they took those neat looking windows off and basically incorporated it into their business. So this is the Ellis Martin building here after they've done that. So if you want to go on to the next slide. And then this is when they changed their name to Sun Graphics. And again, now it's the same 2 buildings there. They've covered up a portion of the, and then this is what it looks like now. So you can see it's the same 2 buildings, plus they've, onto the west, they have added on space from 2 buildings that were torn down. Anyway, in 1976, Sun Graphics purchased the 3 lots to the west, which is the addition there. And these were the sites of the old Martin Funeral Home and later J&F Bargain Center at 1826 Broadway, and also the lot where the Edwards Opera House was on the corner. Gene Rexwinkle was president, but Mr. Gribben was still owner. Rexwinkle later became the owner. The entire 150-foot Broadway frontage was covered with stone and stucco, and they also built a warehouse on Belmont across the alley from the Broadway location. In 2006, Rexwinkle sold to a group of investors from Wichita, and in 2017, the Brush Group, a former customer of Sun Graphics, purchased the company. Brush retained all 46 employees at the plant, and David Martin, who was president, continued in that capacity.
Next, we're going to talk about Strasburgers. Harry Strasburger came to Parsons in 1900 and opened a store on the southeast corner of Central and Main. It was located where the Commercial Bank Operations Center is now located. In 1908, Strasburger leased the 4-story brick building at 18th and Main from Perry White, and that had been White's department store, I believe. But when he leased it, it became Strasburgers, and the new store opened at 2:30 p.m. on Monday, March 23, 1908. From 7:30 to 9:30 p.m. that night, Strasburger saw thousands of people come to see the store for the first time, and he promoted the building as the largest and finest in Parsons. The original cost of the building was $75,000. $15,000, and he put another $15,000 in it. You can see that it was a big building, 18,000 square feet of floor space, 150 feet of display windows on the first floor, and they all had polished copper awnings. And for the big opening, Strasburger had an orchestra playing for that evening. And you can see the big sign on the corner, which I believe was an electric sign, which was quite something at the time.
Yeah, when it was lit up, it was really lit up.
Right.
So there you can see it.
Yes, you can see it at night, and you can see how the windows wrapped around from Main Street and then north on 18th Street as well. Okay, and then next is probably a postcard.
I think
Whoops.
Yeah,
Okay, go back. That
go-
was the postcard.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
well, yeah, you go one back is the postcard.
Yeah,
There you go.
okay,
There you
thanks.
go.
Yeah, there's the postcard, sorry. The postcard says that Strasburgers is the most complete outfitters of womankind in the state of Kansas. They had 60 employees at Strasburger, and Strasburger did a good job of promoting his business, and the Parsons Sun chimed in as well by saying that the store was the delight of the shopper and the pride of Parsons. People from Topeka, Wichita, and larger towns, none had anything like the new Strasburger building. It sold ribbons and neckties and gloves and leather goods and women's clothing and men's clothing and umbrellas, just anything that you would find in a regular department store. And then let's go back to the night view, if you don't mind, one more time, sorry. And as Dave mentioned, you can see how bright that was and how it had to light up that part of town. There were also globe lights, as you can see, right above the awning, the copper awnings, so the light would shine on the awnings as well. And the building burned in one of the most spectacular fires in Parsons history in December of 1918. And Strasburger rebuilt the brick building that later housed J.C. Penney's for many years, and it's now occupied by the home store. But because the fire department cited bad water pressure and they couldn't fight the fire above the 2 stories, when Strasburger rebuilt his building, it wasn't a 4-story building, it was a 2-story building. And Harry Strasburger later located to Coffeyville, where he also had a store, and I believe that store was in business well into the 1980s.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Okay, the next business we'll talk a bit about is Steel Hardware and the building that houses it. This is a 1908 photo, and as I said, it's Steel Hardware. J.F. Steel came to Parsons in 1876. He worked for his old friend E.H. Edwards in the Edwards and Cunningham hardware store, and later bought Cunningham's interest and became Steel and Edwards Hardware and Implements. Later, he got out of that business, went into business with William Busby in the late 1880s. They, I believe, sold grain and coal. But by 1892, I guess, wanted to get back into the hardware store or hardware business, so he built this building at 1730 Main to house his hardware store. And Steel Hardware was in business here until 1928. Next one. At that time, it became Kohl's department store. Kohl's dry goods opened in this location in 1929. The Kohl brothers had stores in 10 different cities: Fort Scott, Paola, Coffeyville, Garnett, Junction City, Manhattan, Parsons, and those were the Kansas stores, and then Nevada, Lamar, and Sedalia in Missouri. They even had a purchasing office in New York City. They had a fire in 1934, a fairly minor fire. It was rebuilt. Unfortunately, the fire that you're looking at here in 1950 was a major fire. The building was rebuilt, but basically it was rebuilt from a brick shell. There was nothing left on the inside. I've seen pictures of the inside of it. literally nothing left but the outer bricks. And they built it back with steel beams and stuff. So it was a major fire there. By 1955, J.J. Newberry's had relocated here from 1806 Maine. If you want to go to the next one. And it's now Bleacher Gear. And as I said, J.J. Newberry's was in business from 1955 to 1975. We opened in this building on Black Friday of 2002. And 2022 will be our 20th year in business in what I still call the Steel Building.
Next, we're going to talk about one of Parsons' oldest and long-running businesses, Lambert and Duffy. What you see here is Charles Lambert and Pete Duffy, who purchased the model clothing store in 1903, and the store was located at 1900 Main Street. It's where Great Southern building is now. In 1903, the store was illuminated by gas lights, and there were no hangers in stores at this time. All the clothing was stacked and folded on tables, so hangers came along in stores a little bit later. Shirts didn't have collars or cuffs, and you bought the starched collars and cuffs separately, and used sleeve bands to regulate the length of your shirt sleeves. So the sleeves were all the same size, and if you had long arms, you didn't use the bands. If you had short, you rolled them up and used a band.
And I'd never heard of that until we read that. I'd never heard of sleeve whatevers.
Sleeve bands,
Sleeve bands.
In 1908, Lambert Duffy moved across the street to 1830 Main. Okay, and then there's another one, I believe. Okay, in 1918, Jess Malone was taken in as a partner, and Lambert Duffy moved across the street, as I said, to 1830 Main Street. In 1934, Malone purchased the remaining interest and became the owner. And this postcard, which is one of my favorites because I really like Art Deco, shows Lambert Duffy Malone after the gleaming black glass was installed at the front. And I think that's called vitrolite. It's they're reflective glass panels, and they're very high styled. Lambert Duffy Malone was in business here until the late 1990s, and in 2004, Jock Snitch relocated to 1814 Main. Okay, next.
This building was originally the Lyric Theater. The photo that you see here is a bit later, after the Lyric Theater had gone out of business, and that was then the Parsons Auto Supply and Repair. The Lyric was open at 1720 Main for winter theater from 1906 to 1910. The summer theater was at 1822 Washington. So when it was nice outside, you could watch theater outdoors, and during the winter when it was cold, you'd go to the Lyric winter theater here. The building just to the west at 1722 Main, which was the Lyric cigar store, as you can see, and that's now Parsons Fine Jewelry, the one to the west the cigar store is. In late 1910, the Parsons Auto Supply and Repair was located here. They did auto storage, repair, and parts, and Charles Irvin was employed there before he opened Irvin's Auto in 1911, and that's Kenny Irwin's grandfather.
And can he tell us something about a car on top
there
of
was
it?
Kenny had told us he has a picture of that building, and there's either a cast iron or a metal car replica up on top of the roof that they use for a sign, which I've seen the picture. Kenny showed me the picture. It's pretty neat. So, all right, the next one we're going to talk about is the Smallies cut price cash store. Smallies was in business from 1912 to 1933, so a little more than 20 years, and they were at 1716 Main. They sold men's and boys' clothing, furnishings, hats, and work clothing, and their motto was every day a sale day at cut prices. And so that building housed Smallies until, as I said, 1933. And then there were quite a few other businesses in there in between. But by 1968, the George family had bought the building and the shoe business that was there and opened George's Shoebox. In 2001, the name was changed to George's Cards and Gifts. And today, it's the Hallmark store that we all know. It doesn't look the same from the outside. It's been updated as far as the outside, but it is the same building there. So, next one we'll talk just a bit about is Stewarts Drug. J.M. Stewart opened his first pharmacy in 1927. He moved to 1804 Main he moved from 1804 Main to the corner location which was 1800 Main, 1934. This is the other location. At one time, he had two locations. This one is at 1712 Main. The Skill Building, one of the Skill buildings is there. It's the one just to the west of the post office now. And in 1959 is when he purchased the second location. Stewart's remained in business in Parsons until 1978. He lasted 51 years, and again, at one time was the longest continuously run retail business in Parsons.
Next, we're going to talk a little bit about the Parsonian. After the Orpheum Theater was destroyed by fire in 1939, there was a vacant lot with a big hole in the ground at the corner where the Parsonian now stands. And as early as 1943, there were preliminary plans to build a new 100-room, 7-story hotel. Four Parsons businessmen purchased the Orpheum site and proposed to build a hotel to be named the Thompson Hotel because the group was headed by J.E. Thompson. And as soon as the war ended and labor was available, and this was in 1943, groundbreaking for the Thompson Hotel was January 1947, and Parsons citizens subscribed $50,000 to be held in escrow until construction began. But unfortunately, there were delays and cost increases, and this project really was doomed, and the site remained undeveloped until even as late as 1949. In 1949, the site was purchased by the Parsons Hotel Committee, and the $50,000 in escrow also went to the new committee. After selling stock in the new hotel to more than 1,300 individuals and businesses amounting to more than $600,000, construction began in early 1953 on the Parsonian. And there you see a picture of the Parsonian being built. This is the picture you saw right before was the last hole-in-the-ground picture. And Pete Hughes has told me many times that it was just a really unsightly pit there.
Everyone was bound to determine they were building a hotel there from the early 40s. They were just determined it was going to happen. It just took a while.
Right, and the Parsonian construction began in October 1953, and the 8-story framework of the Parsonian was completed in October of 1953. This view shows the building as it appeared on October 5th of that year, and the building is reinforced concrete. The Parsonian Hotel Committee continued to encourage people to invest in the Parsons newest hotel. They said it was a civic responsibility, it was a real opportunity, and it would be a big boost to the community to have a thriving hotel. Okay, next. And here's a picture of the Parsons Sun celebrating the grand opening of the hotel. I believe the Parsons Sun that day says, Today is H Day, Hotel Day in Parsons.
I like the caption at the bottom of it.
A dream come true.
The Parsonian, a dream come true.
True, yes. The Parsonian name was chosen because it fit the project in numerous ways. It associated the hotel with the city. It was a tribute to the Parsons residents who had financed it through stock purchases, and it was a tribute to the Parsons residents whose energy had made the hotel a dream come true. Okay. And this is a picture of the staff on opening day in the hotel lobby. And this is in May of 1954. At this time, ownership for the hotel was with the Parsons Community Hotel Incorporated, a corporation of more than 1,300 stockholders, as I mentioned before. But management of the hotel was in the hands of American Hotels. And American Hotels was an organization that was the largest hotel management chain in the country. It managed more than 50 hotels from Texas to Maine. Next. Here's an advertisement showing the Parsonian in all of its initial glory, a truly fine hotel. And is there one more slide? No. Okay. Well, unfortunately, all of this talk about this wonderful hotel, and it was a beautiful hotel, and it was well run at the time, but unfortunately, all this optimism in the community didn't work out financially for the well-being of the hotel. With a cost of over $900,000 and stock sales of $625,000, you can see that there was a $275,000 mortgage from the very start of the hotel's opening. So the hotel really only made money 1 year, and that was in 1960. Lots of debts, back taxes, past due accounts, and ultimately missed insurance premiums made it imperative that the hotel be sold, and Joe Bartelli in 1962 assumed the mortgage of the hotel. And the Bartelli family ran the hotel for many years, and it's now owned by the Flint Hills Holding Company and is known as Parsonian Apartments. Fortunately, when they turned it into apartments, they were quite sensitive to the style of the hotel, and they kept the lobby and the overall look on the outside of the hotel with the great stainless steel graphics and coffee shop intact. So the outside and the lobby looks much the same as it did when it opened, including that great little wooden telephone booth in the lobby that when you open the door, the light comes on in the telephone booth. And in 2015, the Parsonian was listed on the National Register of Historic Places.
All right, the next business or couple businesses we'll talk about will be Don Devines. And his original business that he opened in Parsons in April of 1953 was called the Crumpet Hut. And we'll see in a bit, we'll see a picture of it, and it was basically a hut. It was located at 10th and Main, and it featured AAA root beer, minute bun sandwiches, which he advertised as toasted inside out. And I'm not sure what that meant, but they also had burgers, hot dogs, fries, and Cokes. By 1963, the Crumpet Hut restaurant was known as Don Devines DriveIn. And by this time, Devines was also serving chicken and rib dinners. And interestingly, Devine was 16 years old when he opened the Crumpet Hut. So we'll go to the next one. Then this is a postcard of his restaurant in September of 1967. He started construction on this new $100,000 restaurant, same location. was 4,800 square feet and had seating for 192 customers. And it was a far cry from the 100 square foot root beer stand that Devines started at the same location in 1953. And Devines specialized in sophisticated chicken, and multiple people at the presentation remembered that sophisticated chicken was kind of his copyrighted name of his chicken, and his method of preparation was a secret to his chicken. So I think I did yours, but that's okay. Do that one.
Okay, here's a ad for the 25th anniversary, and Don Devine took out a full-page ad in the Parsons Sun in 1978 celebrating his 25th year in business at the same location in Parsons.
And you can see up at the top left-hand corner, that's the Crumpet Hut, that little, very little building up there.
Right. And I don't think I've told you this, but Don Devine's is the first restaurant I had a meal out in Parsons when I moved to Parsons in 1976. Devines was the place to stop for hungry high school sports teams after the games. And in 1979, after 26 years in business, he sold the restaurant to Mark and Linda Davis. They opened the Katy Station and were very successful with that restaurant as well. Next.
Okay, the next business we'll talk just a bit about is Richard's Drive-In. It's located was located, and the building is still located at 720 Main, where the Hickory Hole is today. Mr. and Mrs. Claude Lundy and their son Richard, that's who the drive-in was named after, Richard's Drive-In, opened on March 4th in 1950. And according to everyone at the presentations, this was the East End turnaround spot for kids dragging Maine in the 50s and 60s. This is where you turn around. Richard Lundy was the manager, that was the son. If you want to go to the next one. And this is the grand reopening of Richard's Drive-In. In 1963, the drive-in was completely remodeled and had a new grand opening. The restaurant featured 6 hamburgers for $1 and Amanda fried chicken. And no one at the presentation we gave knew what Amanda fried chicken was, but that's what they had in their advertisements, and that's what they had on the outside of their building, was featuring Amanda fried chicken.
I think Amanda was the person
He thinks that's who was cooking
the chicken, but I don't know.
No one really knows, so it's one of those historical mysteries. Richard Lundy had gone to college, and Mr. and Mrs. Lundy had continued operating the restaurant. They lived in the apartment at the rear of the establishment, and in 1968, Richards was sold to Mr. and Mrs. Robert Shea. Mr. Shea was a Katy switchman, and Mrs. Shea would operate the restaurant. So, and it, as we said earlier today, it's the Hickory Hole. All right, then we are going to talk a bit about the Dairy Queen, and this is not the Dairy Queen that I remember. This is the original Dairy Queen in Parsons. It opened in Parsons on June 29th, 1948. In an 18 by 36 cinder block building. It was located on the northeast corner of 32nd and Main, and at that time it was a rounded corner because the railroad tracks, the Frisco tracks, went across there, and it was a rounded corner there. It was operated by Mr. and Mrs. Harold Vivers and son William, and we laughed because it seems like every drive-in is operated by 2 parents and a son, and the son gets, so it looks like maybe the parents are looking for something for their son to do. They sold ice cream and ice cream products, the same as Dairy Queen does today. They shared the lot with Joe Ferrand's The Tower Cafe, and I haven't found anybody yet that remembers The Tower Cafe, but he was on the same lot. By 1964, Dairy Queen had become the Dairy Palace there at that location. There was a lawsuit and disputes over corporate prices that were being charged to the franchise people, and so anyway, it became the Dairy Palace.
And next we're going to talk about the Dairy Delight. On April 1st, 1950, Carl Hunter opened a frozen dairy product concession stand at 3128 Main Street. Hunter was a well-known local grocer at the time. The building was on the southeast corner of 32nd and Main, basically 3128 Main. The restaurant had windows on 3 sides so customers could have a clear view of the spotless interior. That was their motivation.
And basically right across the street from Dairy Queen is what it would have been. Yep.
Okay, next one. Okay, this is the Dairy Delight sign. As the sign said, it's not too late to try a rough enough sundae. Hunter's Dairy Delight neon sign was as outrageous as his marketing. He came up with crazy names for his concoctions that were floats and sundaes. He had limeade on one end of the sign and a cone on the other, and it made people want to stop at the restaurant, as most of those kinds of signs did. Next. This is one of the strangest photographs that we've run across.
I say creepy. He likes it.
I like it.
I think it's kind of
cool.
creepy myself.
I think it's cool. But anyway, this is a photography, in a studio of different treats that Dairy Delight made. Carl Hunter was really ahead of his time in other businesses in his marketing. He had named the Sunday contest. He had music and bands in his parking lot. He had a Sunday smorgasbord where you could put on your own toppings. And he had wild and unusual ice cream creations, such as the Purple People Eater, named after the song, I guess, the Shaboom Sundae, and the Brown Bomber, although I've said I just don't think the Brown Bomber sounds like a really good name for a sundae. But moving on. He also called the drive-in the department store of all your favorites. But this is, no matter what you think of this is, in one way or another, it's an unusual photograph.
It's definitely unusual. I'll give you that.
Okay. Next.
Okay, and Carl Hunter had his business at, I believe, 3128 Main, but he also had other businesses on the same lot, and this is one of them. This is Aunt Minnie's Chick Inn, and this opened on the Dairy Delight lot at 3128 Main in 1958. And as you can see, it's a fairly small building, and obviously fried chicken is what they did, and it was mostly boxed chicken to go, because obviously there's no seating in the restaurant. So next one. And as Mike said earlier, Carl Hunter was a really good marketer, and he always had something going on. And because he had multiple businesses on his lot, he also would bring in bands or entertainment on the lot. And you have to just admire the guy to go, what a genius deal to bring in a band and get a bunch of hungry kids out there, and then you're open to sell them drinks and food and all that stuff. So it just sounds like a really good marketing idea. And he had rock bands, he had Mexican music, he even had a Hawaiian band at one time. By 1960, Dairy Delight had become the Dairy Snacks. Carl Hunter still owned it. But by 1963, Carl Hunter sold his drive-in, and from then on it was called Louies DriveIn, and a lot of people remember Louies DriveIn. So we want to go on to the next slide. And this is, believe it or not, also on the Dairy Delight lot at 3128 Main. And this picture was in our book that we did about Parsons in 2008. And I think, if not the most commented on picture, one of the most commented on pictures that we had. Everyone wanted to know where that was located. And at the time, we didn't really know a lot about it, but I've learned a lot since then. So we'll kind of give you a little update on it. As I said, it's on the same lot as the Dairy Delight at 3128 Main. And it's just a tiny wood building. I'm not sure how you could prepare food in that, but Anyway, it was advertised as featuring Parsons' original sandwich on a stick. And they also said, don't confuse this with ordinary hot dogs. So basically, I think it was a corn dog. But they made it sound pretty fancy. And it was listed at the time as Carl Hunter and Bert Austin's Pup Shack. It was open evenings until 11 p.m. And if you want to go back to that other picture, my favorite part of the picture is the neon sign with the hot pups. That's pretty awesome, and I would really like to have that sign. As I said, this building was also on the Dairy Delight lots. Now you can go forward. And this was the grand opening of the hot pups in August of 1950, and it advertised that from 7 o'clock to 8 p.m. on that date, you could buy a pup for 15 cents and get a free Hires root beer, so pretty good deal there. Bert Austin ran the hot pup store until the late 50s or early 60s. It did reopen in 1961 under a man named Sam Cottingem. And I didn't find anything else after 1961, so I don't think he lasted a long time. One of the ladies at the presentation that we gave remembered going to it and remembered that name. And of course, Kenny Irvin, he remembers everything. He remembered the man as well, this Cottingem guy. But I couldn't really find anything else after 1961, so I don't think he lasted a long time. So that is we'll end it on that. Do you have anything else you want to say?
No, but we will be doing another presentation in October and filming that one as well to wrap up the presentations for the 150th anniversary of Parsons. But thank you for watching tonight's presentation.